Hey guys, tonight we're diving headfirst into one of history's most romantic and wildly expensive architectural projects, the Mausoleum at Halicarnassus. Don't be fooled by the name, it's not an exotic herb or some lost spell from Harry Potter. It's one of the original 7 wonders of the ancient world. And honestly, if you were actually dropped into 4th century BCE Halicarnassus, there's a good chance you wouldn't survive the first day too hot, no Wi-Fi, and you'd have to barter for water with people wearing robes and side-eyeing your sneakers. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment telling me what city you're in and what time it is right now. I love seeing where you're all tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your sandals crunch over a dusty gravel road. The sun above is so bright it feels like it's personally offended by your existence. You squint toward the horizon. Yep, that's the Aegean Sea gleaming in the distance. You're walking toward an ancient city that doesn't even exist on your GPS, Halicarnassus. It's not huge, not like Athens huge, but every inch of it feels curated, like someone threw Greek geometry, Persian flair, and a touch of ambitious urban planning into a blender. Street vendors call out in a dialect you don't quite understand, some mix of Ionic Greek and local carrionan. The air smells like goat cheese, olive oil, and heat. You're not here to sightsee. You're here for a legend. A tomb, to be exact. Not just any tomb, though one built by a grieving queen for her husband. A monument so grand, people literally started calling all elaborate tombs mausoleums after this one. As you make your way toward the city center, the road starts changing. The pavement becomes smoother, almost shiny, made from a pale, sun-bleached stone that echoes slightly underfoot. You pass strange carvings etched into the stone walls, warriors fighting centaurs, lions devouring mythical sea creatures, gods handing down what looks suspiciously like construction permits. A boy selling oranges grins and hands you a piece of dried orange peel candy, apparently good for travelers. You chew it as you walk deeper into the city's veins. Halicarnassus feels like a cultural smoothie. Not fully Greek, not fully Persian, something else, something new. And at the heart of it all is the man who made it happen, Mausolus. He wasn't just a satrapa, fancy word for regional ruler under the Persian Empire. He was a city planner, a military strategist, and a man with excellent taste in dramatic architecture. And his wife, who was also his sister, don't panic, that was totally a royal thing back then, loved him so fiercely she decided to turn his tomb into a wonder of the world. As you approach a shady plaza, you spot a stone slab covered in inscriptions. Some local is mumbling their way through it. You can't make out the words, but the letters look vaguely familiar ancient Greek, but with odd flourishes. A wrinkled elder taps you on the shoulder and points up toward the hills, where a cluster of scaffolding and wooden beams stands tall. "That's what you came to see," he says with a toothless grin. "You've arrived just in time. The tomb is still under construction, and you, my friend, are standing at the foot of history as it's being written one marble block at a time. Up ahead, workers haul stone, architects wave their arms over sheepskin blueprints, and somewhere, someone is probably arguing about whose turn it is to buy lunch. This is not just a burial site, it's a statement, a love letter in stone, a political billboard carved with gods and monsters. And by the way, historians still argue over whether Halicarnassus should even count as a Greek city. Some say it was too Persian. Others say it was Hellenic with a twist. A few just throw their hands up and call it Mausoleum. Yeah, that's how iconic he became. His name turned into an adjective. So here you are. At the start of the road, the sun begins to dip toward the sea, casting a golden hue over the half-built tomb on the hill. The breeze tugs at your clothes and whispers through the scaffolding. Somewhere in the distance, a chisel strikes stone and the first notes of a wonder begin to hum. You wake up early the next morning, well, not so much by choice as by the sound of hammers clinking against marble. Turns out, living next to one of the greatest construction sites in ancient history isn't exactly peaceful. You step outside, rubbing sleep from your eyes, and catch your first full view of the mausoleum skeleton rising in the distance. It's hard not to be impressed. Even half-built, the thing already looks like it's trying to one-up the gods. Scaffolding spirals around it like ivy, workers scurry up and down like ants, And there's this constant buzz in the air, the kind that comes from too many deadlines and not enough shade. You start walking toward the site, blending into the slow current of donkeys, carts, and sweaty men shouting over blocks of white marble. The closer you get, the more surreal it feels. This isn't just a tomb. It's theater, political theater, grief turned into geometry. A young scribe, maybe 17, notices you gawking and laughs. First time seeing it, he asks, handing you a flatbread wrapped around something vaguely resembling cheese. Queen Artemisia wants it done before the gods realize she's outbuilding Olympus. You nod like that makes total sense. Let's get one thing straight. Mausolus wasn't just some guy who liked fancy tombs. He was the ruler of Caria, a region technically under Persian control, but in reality, he ruled like a Greek when he felt like it and a Persian when it suited him. Bilingual, bicultural, and probably the kind of guy who could win a debate while adjusting his cloak. He expanded cities, built fortresses, and moved Halicarnassus' capital inland for better defense. Smart dude. When he died in 353 BCE, the whole city went quiet. Well, for like 2 seconds then, everyone heard the queen had a plan. Artemisia wasn't just his wife. She was also his sister. Yes, we're still doing that. His political partner. And from the looks of it, his #1 fan. And when he died, she didn't crumble. She hired the best artists in the entire known world. And we're talking the ancient Greek Avengers of architecture here. There's Satyros and Pythiastul architects who literally wrote a book about building big stuff. Then came the sculptors. Scopas, who helped remodel the Temple of Artemis. Leocares, who loved dramatic flair. Bryaxis, whose sculptures always seemed like they were judging you. And Timotheus, known for giving his statues the windswept god look. Each artist was assigned one side of the building. Imagine being so cool that people build your tomb like a collaborative art project. That's Mausolus for you. As you wander closer, you see some of the sculptors at work. One is carving what looks like a lion with abs. Another is finessing the curls on a massive stone horse's mane. These aren't just decorations. They're telling a story of battles, power, legacy, and probably a little bit of ego. Mausolus is gone, but Artemisia is making sure the world never stops talking about him. One of the coolest parts? The building itself isn't like anything else at the time. It's a strange but elegant combo of Egyptian-style base, Greek columns, and a stepped pyramid roof, a little bit of everything. And the best part? A 4-horse chariot on top, supposedly featuring Mausolus and Artemisia themselves. Giant statues riding into the afterlife in style. Fun fact, the word mausoleum comes directly from this building. Like, this tomb was so extra that it became the blueprint for every fancy burial site ever after. Even Napoleon was like, yeah, I want that energy. But here's the thing, no one tells you. History nerds still can't agree on what the inside looked like. Was it an open hall with columns? A sealed inner chamber? Did it have mosaics? Burn incense 24? 7? Academic arguments on this topic are still going strong, and honestly, no one's ready to wave the white flag. You step back from the chaos of construction and sit on a stone bench beneath a young olive tree. Around you, 100 people move with the shared purpose masons, artists, assistants, even errand boys running with jugs of wine and wet cloths. There is a sense of urgency, of ambition, of grief turned into marble. And at the center of it all stands Artemisia quiet, composed, watching every corner of the worksite like a director running the most complicated stage play in the world. You take a bite of your flatbread, dust off your tunic, and realize this isn't just about one man's death. This is about legacy, power, love, and leaving behind something so massive it'll outlive time itself. You're back at the site the next day, and this time, the sun hasn't even cleared the horizon. But the Mausoleum project? Already wide awake. Smoke from morning fires drifts lazily above rooftops. Somewhere, someone's yelling about a missing chisel. And you're still not quite used to ancient Morningsare clutching a warm cup of barley water and wondering if you accidentally joined a guild. You wander toward the western side of the construction zone, where one of the sculptors is holding court. His name is Scopas, and he's got the dramatic aura of someone who definitely listens to his own monologues. His beard is trimmed with surgical precision, and even the folds of his tunic look like they were art directed. You pause near a half-carved relief panel. It's chaos in stone-writhing bodies, charging horses, spears, mid-throw, but there's elegance in the movement. The figures practically vibrate with energy. A local boy tells you this scene shows the Amazonomachy Greeks battling the warrior women known as Amazons. Classic Greek art flex. Apparently, every side of the mausoleum gets its own epic narrative. Scopas is in charge of one, and the others, Leocares, Bryaxis, Timotheus, handle the rest. But instead of coordinating like a peaceful art collective, they're each secretly trying to outshine the others. You get the sense that if they had Instagram, these guys would be passive-aggressively posting whip shots with captions like, "Some people carve for fame, I carve for the gods." A few workers gossip nearby. One swears Timotheus sculpted a centaur that looks suspiciously like Leochair's uncle. Another claims Skopas hasn't eaten solid food in a week, just drinks wine and mutters about texture. You step closer to the carving, fingers just inches from the stone. Even half finished, the details are insane: the folds of clothing, the tension in the muscles, the absolute drama of it all. This isn't just storytelling, it's propaganda. Mausolus isn't buried here yet, but the monument is already screaming his legacy across time. The Amazonomachy isn't just about ancient war stories, it's symbolic. The Amazons represent chaos, outsiders, the wild edge of the world, and the Greeks, order, civilization, control. At least that's the PR version. The irony, of course, is that Halicarnassus itself is a blend of those two worlds: Persian governance in a Greek skin. It's like Mausolus lived that tension, and now his tomb literally carves it in stone. Oh, and here's your weird historical tidbit for the day. Some scholars believe the Amazons might have been inspired by real steppe warrior women who trained on horseback and fought alongside men. Others think they were a total myth and ancient way of grappling with the concept of powerful women. And yes, historians are still arguing about it. Back on site, you watch as one of the assistants sands down the rough edge of a warrior's spear. The sculpture's face is serenadely calm in the middle of a frenzy. You feel a chill despite the sun warming the stone around you. Suddenly, a group of children runs past you, laughing, carrying what looks like bits of old sculpture discarded from the workshop. One of them offers you a piece. It's just a broken fragment of a face, but it's haunting. Maybe part of an Amazon, maybe a god, maybe someone entirely forgotten. You turn it over in your hand. Funny how even the scraps here feel sacred. A few older citizens sit nearby, sipping watered wine and watching the construction. One of them leans over to you and murmurs, "When this thing is finished, Halicarnassus won't just be a city, it'll be a story the world remembers." You believe him. The sun is higher now. Workers are calling for a break. Artists are fussing over lighting. Yes, lighting, even though it's 350 BCE. And you decide to stretch your legs. You walk along the base of the mausoleum, stepping around loose stone and tools, and try to picture it complete. Massive marble stairs, a temple-like colonnade of Ionic columns, a pyramid roof above that, and way up top, a 4-horse chariot larger than life-carrying Mausolus and Artemisia into the afterlife. You squint upward, trying to see it, even though it's not there yet, almost like you can hear it calling through time. It's a little later in the week, and your sandals are finally broken in just in time for you to hike all the way to the marble quarries outside the city. No one warned you it would be uphill both ways. And dusty. So dusty. But you're here on a mission, to understand where the mausoleum's bones come from. You arrive just as a team of workers hauls a freshly cut slab onto a wooden sled. The stone is dazzling white under the sun, with veins that shimmer like frost. It's not just any marble, it's local Carian marble, prized for its purity. And the thing weighs about as much as an elephant that's been lifting weights. A foreman spots you watching and shouts over the noise, "You want to carry one? Builds character." You politely decline and sit on a warm rock instead, wiping your face with a cloth that used to be clean this morning. Here's something you wouldn't expect. Quarrying marble in the 4th century BCE is basically a high-stakes combo of brute force and engineering genius. Workers use iron wedges, wooden levers, and what looks like a collective sense of stubbornness to split massive blocks from the earth. Then comes the real headache, hauling them all the way back to Halicarnassus without, dying. The trick? Rolling them on wooden beams and dragging them with oxen. But when the road gets tricky, they grease the logs with olive oil. Yes, actual olive oil. Who knew your salad dressing could also move a ton of rock? One of the older quarrymen leans over to you during a water break and says, they say Mausolus ordered a new road just for these stones. Whole thing paved with crushed seashells. Guy wanted his tomb to sparkle before it was even built. You don't know if that's true, but it sounds fancy enough to be. And also crushed seashells? That's some luxury grade roadwork right there. You ask him about the chariot on top of the mausoleum, and he grins. Ah, the quadriga. They're carving it back in town. Took them months just to figure out how to balance it. That thing's going to weigh more than some temples. He pauses, then adds, wouldn't be surprised if Artemisia puts herself in the chariot next to him. That woman's got more steel than half the army. You file that away for later. Because honestly, the idea of a queen riding marble horses into the afterlife beside her king/brother is kind of iconic. Back in Halicarnassus, you visit the sculpting yard again. A crowd has gathered around the nearly complete statue of one of the horses muscles taut, mouth open in a silent neigh, mane caught mid-gallop. You half expect it to blink. A group of younger apprentices is arguing nearby. One swears the horses are modeled after Persian war steeds. Another insists they're pure Greek in style. Someone even claims one of the horses was based on Artemisia's personal favorite, a black stallion she used to ride through the city. You sigh. Another debate. Another evening where historians of the future will still be trying to figure out who's right. Also, here's your fun, weird fact of the night. It's rumored the chariot wasn't just decorative. Some say it held an actual mechanism that made the horses move slightly with the wind, like a marble weather vane, but dramatically extra. No one's found proof of this. But let's be real, if anyone was going to build a tomb with moving parts, it's this royal couple. You stroll back toward the main plaza, passing merchants selling tiny clay models of the mausoleum. Souvenir game strong. One even offers you a miniature version with a painted chariot and glittery columns. You buy it because, honestly, why not? Sitting on the steps of a nearby fountain, you look out at the rising monument in the distance. Workers now outnumber priests. Artists and engineers eat together under shaded canopies. The entire city feels like it's orbiting around this one enormous idea. A tomb, a symbol, a story carved in stone. And as you turn the tiny clay model in your hands, you wonder how much of Mausolus is in the mausoleum and how much of it is really Artemisia's way of rewriting his story in marble. It's another golden morning in Halicarnassus, and this time, you find yourself being gently ushered into the royal gardens. There's a hush here that feels almost sacred, partly from the manicured silence, partly because no one wants to get caught gossiping too close to where she might walk by. Yes, today you're shadowing the queen herself. Artemisia II, sister, wife, ruler, mourner, architect of one of the ancient world's most ambitious grief projects. You follow her from a distance at first. She's dressed in deep blue, the kind of blue that would make the sea jealous. She's speaking quietly to one of the chief architects, probably complaining about column spacing or insisting that the new staircases feel less tragic. You can't hear everything, but you catch a phrase here and there. Too heavy. No, make it breathe. This isn't a woman building a mausoleum. This is someone composing a poem out of marble, light, and shadow. You're starting to think Artemisia didn't just want to honor Mausolus, wanted to outlive him through the very thing meant to bury him. And here's the kicker. According to later legends, Artemisia was so devoted to Mausolus that she literally drank his ashes mixed into wine. Historians still argue about that one. Some say it's metaphorical, some swear she actually did it. Either way, that's love, or obsession, or both. Who's to say? You sit beneath a fig tree and watch the palace staff carry scrolls, models, and long wooden rods used for measuring angles. There's a new proposal for a column arrangement tone that'll let light spill into the inner chamber at exactly noon each day. Artemisia is nodding, but she's not quite smiling. Not yet. A philosopher in a threadbare toga walks by muttering, "No tomb can hold love. Only time can do that." A nearby worker responds, "Time gets no commission on this job. Here's a juicy bit of political context. Artemisia isn't just building a monument to grief, she's stabilizing her rule. In a patriarchal world where a woman on the throne invites all kinds of daggers, both metaphorical and not so metaphorical, this tomb is her way of saying, I'm not a placeholder. I'm legacy incarnate. And it's working. Local nobles fall in line. The priests keep silent. Even the artists, temperamental as they are awed. No one wants to mess with the woman building eternity. You slip through a side entrance into the mausoleum's inner chamber, still a work in progress, but it already echoes. This will be the heart of it all. Mausolus will rest here, under layers of narrative, marble, and sheer royal will. You imagine standing in this chamber centuries from now, dust everywhere, columns cracked, and yet the story's still hanging in the air like incense. You run your hand along the half-finished relief on the wall. Another battle scene. Maybe the centaurs, this time symbolizing raw nature, wildness, the need for civilization to triumph. Again, the PR is strong with this one. You pause, think, is this a tomb, or is it a message, or both? You find Artemisia again just outside, overlooking the harbor. Her expression is unreadable, but her posture says everything. She is not a woman in mourning. She is a ruler writing history in 3 dimensions. A gull shrieks overhead. The sea shimmers. Behind her, the mausoleum climbs higher, layer by layer, as if daring the heavens to try and forget. The sun has started its slow descent by the time you make your way to the city's outer edge, where the workers prepping the mausoleum's base are still at IT picking, lifting, hauling, and definitely yelling in at least 4 different dialects. Today's focus? Foundations. Not the glamorous part, sure, but let's be honest, without it, the whole monument would sink like soggy pita bread. The base of the mausoleum is massive, both literally and symbolically. Nearly 20 meters tall is the platform upon which the entire structure and legis arises. You sit on a nearby chunk of stone as the foreman explains that the base isn't just a big slab. Oh no, it's layered with inner chambers, sealed corridors, and maybe, just maybe, a secret or two. One old mason whispers a theory while sharpening his chisel. There's a second tomb down there, not for Mausolus, for enemies, buried to serve him in the afterlife. You raise your eyebrows. He just shrugs. Could be superstition, could be insurance. Archaeologists haven't found evidence of this idea yet. But hey, when your monument is this extra, nothing's off the table. As you watch the stone blocks being perfectly aligned, someone offers you a chance to help with the leveling process. You try it. It's hard. Like, embarrassingly hard. Turns out aligning marble blocks without lasers or cement is a brutal mix of geometry, instinct, and sweaty optimism. And they're not even using mortarth. Blocks are fitted together that precisely. Nearby, a group of younger workers is playing a game that involves tossing pebbles into a carved depression in a discarded stone fragment. You ask what the game is called. One kid says, "We call it Don't Miss or You Carry Sand Tomorrow." High stakes. Let's talk structure for a second. The mausoleum is essentially divided into 3 major parts. The base, where we are now, heavy and fortress-like. The colonnade, that elegant temple section with ionic columns, and the pyramidal roof, which will eventually support the quadriga on top. Right now, the base alone could be mistaken for a standalone building. That's how monumental it is. And still, it's just a foundation. You walk around to the north corner, where a few blocks are inscribed with short messages, some prayers, some names, some jokes so old they're not even funny anymore. One says, "May this stone stand longer than my debts." Same, buddy. Same. There's a peculiar coldness to the base. Not metaphoric actual cold. You press your hand against it. The stone retains chill even in the heat. Someone tells you that the inner burial chamber will be placed deep within this core, designed not just for permanence, but for resistance, to time, to theft, to decay. And here comes a classic. Historians are still arguing about whether Mausolus was actually buried here at all. Some say he was interred beneath the monument, others think his body was lost at sea. There's even a theory that the real burial happened in secret to prevent grave robbing. Basically, he might be in there or not. And No, no one's found a skeleton labeled, "Hi, I'm Mausolus," yet. As the workers prepare to call it a day, you spot a delivery of crushed purple porphyrion of the most expensive decorative stones in the ancient world. It's being used for the chamber walls. Fancy. Rumor has it that Artemisia personally approved every stone's color. Nothing too dark, nothing too bright. She wants dignity, not disco. On your way out, you pause near the scaffolding. From here, you can already see the beginnings of the next level rising. The base is nearly complete, and soon, very soon, it'll start to look like something divine. You glance up at the sky, where twilight has begun to drape itself in soft indigo. For a moment, you picture the finished structure, towering above the harbor, shining with polished marble and shadowed by sculpted gods. All this for love? For politics? For memory? Maybe a little of each. But whatever the reason, it's gonna be unforgettable. By now, you figured out something important. This project isn't just about building a tomb, it's about building drama. And nothing says drama like a towering colonnade of glistening white columns, rising above the city like they're auditioning to become clouds. You arrive at the construction site just as the scaffolding creaks under the weight of the latest marble shaft being hoisted up. It's one of 36 ionic columns that will form the upper temple section of the mausoleum. These aren't the stubby little columns you'd see in a modest temple. These are tall, elegant, and outrageously fluted vertical grooves carved into them like someone's been icing a marble cake. A young architect notices you staring and decides you need a lesson. He explains that Ionic columns are the Goldilocks of ancient architecture, grander than the plain Doric, but not as over-the-top as Corinthian. Basically, they're the just right of tomb decor. Each column is carved in segments called drums, stacked one on top of another with invisible pegs and an unhealthy amount of precision. One wrong tilt, and the whole column ends up looking like it's had too much wine. The workers spend hours polishing each one, and you hear someone mutter, "Mausolus better come back from the dead to appreciate this." Oh, and in case you were wondering, yes, the fluting is purely aesthetic. It serves no structural purpose, but this is Halicarnassus in full flex mode. Function is important, but fabulous is better. The colonnade isn't just for show though. It also shelters the upper level, which is more like a mini temple than part of a tomb. From below, it creates a space of openness and light between the heavy base and the enclosed pyramid roof. Symbolically, it's like the soul is floating somewhere between earth and sky, or maybe between taxes and transcendence. Hard to say. You walk a slow circle around the emerging temple platform, listening to the rhythmic tap-tap-tap of chisels. A sculptor is working on the column capitals, those elegant swirly tops that scream Ionic. You ask him how many he's done so far. 15, he says without looking up. Only 21 to go, unless she changes her mind again. She, of course, meaning Artemisia. Rumor has it she personally sketched some of the designs for the capitals, and if that's not true, well, she probably could have. You sneak into a tent where design models are stored, and find a clay miniature of the completed colonnade. It's stunning, perfectly balanced. Light dances around the gaps between columns, and you start to understand why the ancients believed the gods preferred buildings with symmetry. It's almost hypnotic, like a marble lullaby. Out by the construction ramp, a visiting philosopher in a mustard yellow robe is giving an unsolicited lecture to some bored teenagers about the impermanence of structure in the face of memory. You tune him out until he blurts, "The space between the columns matters more than the columns themselves." Okay, now that's kind of profound. One apprentice scribbles that down in a wax tablet. Another rolls his eyes so hard you can hear it. By sunset, most of the crew is packing up, but a few linger to admire the way the last rays of light hit the columns, just so creating long, golden shadows that stretch toward the sea. You find a spot on a nearby wall and sit quietly, watching it all unfold. The base is solid. The colonnade is rising. Soon, the pyramid will start to form above it. But here, in this moment, you're caught in the balance between foundation and sky, between past and possibility. And it hits you this section, this open space, this ring of marble columns might just be the most beautiful part of the entire mausoleum, because this is where the structure breathes. As you settle back into the rhythm of the city, your thoughts drift upward literally, because today you're about to witness the raising of the mausoleum's roof. Not just any roof, but the iconic step pyramid that crowns this colossal tomb. You make your way to the construction site early, just in time to catch the first light bouncing off the smooth marble blocks that will form the pyramid. It's impressive tier upon tier of gleaming stone, stacked with an architectural precision that would make modern builders nod in grudging respect. The pyramid isn't a traditional Egyptian shape, but more of a tiered structure with several layers, each slightly smaller than the one below, creating a stepped effect. This design is unique enough that historians still debate exactly why Artemisia chose it. Some say it symbolizes a stairway to the gods, others argue it's a visual statement of power ascending step by step, closer to immortality. A crew of workers chants in unison as they hoist a large slab into place, ropes creaking under tension. You realize that all of this is done without cranes or pulleys as we know them today. Instead, they rely on a complex system of ramps, pulleys, and raw muscle. Watching them coordinate is like watching an ancient ballet, choreographed by sweat and stubbornness. One of the foremen jokes that these guys have the best biceps in Korea, and you're tempted to ask if they have a gym membership. Spoiler, no gym, just a lot of marble. You wander closer to the pyramid's edge and spot a group of artisans carving intricate reliefs directly into the stones. Scenes of battle, myth, and daily life flow in elegant bas-relief, telling stories meant to echo through eternity. You catch a glimpse of a strange figure riding a chariot, probably the mythical centaur, and wonder how many tales are being rewritten by the chisels here. It's fascinating and slightly amusing that even though the mausoleum was supposed to be a solemn tomb, the artists seem to have had fun slipping in all sorts of local myths and personal touches, like an ancient version of Easter eggs hidden in marble. Speaking of which, here's a fun little oddity. Some archaeologists have found tiny holes drilled into certain stones. No one's quite sure why. One theory suggests they were for attaching decorations that have since been lost, like golden plaques or bronze ornaments. Another theory claims there's some kind of ancient air conditioning, designed to keep the structure cool. You can imagine that last one making it into a modern architectural magazine's weirdest design features list. While watching the work, you overhear a debate among some scholars gathered nearby. They're arguing about the pyramid's original height. Some say it stood over 45 meters tall, making it nearly as impressive as the Great Pyramid of Giza. Others think it was shorter, closer to 35 meters, based on surviving ruins and ancient texts. The truth? Lost in time, and maybe intentionally exaggerated by ancient tour guides. As the sun dips lower, casting long shadows over the pyramid's tiers, you imagine the final step, the quadrigoth four-horse chariot sculpture that will eventually ride atop this marble mountain. It's said to be so massive and heavy that balancing it was a major engineering puzzle, one that took months to solve. You chuckle, thinking about the poor sculptors and architects nervously sweating over this final piece. As dusk settles, the pyramid looks like a stairway to the heavens, quiet, dignified, and a little bit dramatic. You feel a strange mix of awe and curiosity. This isn't just a tomb. It's a statement, a monument, and a bit of a show-off rolled into one. And with that, the roof of the mausoleum is rising, step by step, toward eternity. Hey, guess what? Now you get to meet the star atop this whole grand mausoleum, the quadriga. That's right, the four-horse chariot sculpture crowning the pyramid like the cherry on an already enormous marble sundae. You stroll up the hill near the construction site, just in time to see the sculptors putting the finishing touches on this beast of a statue. It's gigantic. The horses seem ready to bolt, muscles taut, nostrils flaring, as if they could break free and gallop straight into the Aegean Sea. The charioteer stands firm, reins in hand, exuding that "I got this" vibe that you imagine any ancient driver would want when speeding at full tilt. Legend says this quadriga wasn't just a decorative flourish. It symbolized Mausolus's triumph over death and his journey to immortality. A pretty epic statement considering the whole monument is, a tomb. The sculptor, who looks like he hasn't slept in 3 days, tells you they're using a mix of marble and bronze, mostly for the reins and details that catch the light just right. He swears the bronze pieces were imported all the way from Rhodes, which makes you wonder about the logistics of moving all this heavy stuff around in a world without trucks or forklifts. You watch as workers carefully hoist the quadriga onto the peak of the pyramid. It's like a circus act, with ropes creaking, men shouting, and everyone holding their breath. One wrong move and it's goodbye masterpiece and probably a few fingers. Thankfully, it all goes up smoothly. which prompts a collective, relieved cheer from the crew. Here's a fun side note. Historians still debate who actually sculpted the quadriga. Some say it was Leo Shares, the same guy who worked on the famous statue of Zeus at Olympia. Others argue it was a team effort. Either way, the statue became so famous that travelers from all over the ancient world came to see it, making the mausoleum a kind of early tourist hotspot. You overhear a local joke. Why did Mausolus's horses never run away? Because even they knew it was a dead end. The workers laugh some groan. You file it away under bad puns from antiquity. The quadriga's placement atop the pyramid wasn't just about looks. It also had a practical side. From a distance, it acted like a beacon, visible from miles away over the Aegean coast. Imagine ancient sailors spotting that majestic silhouette and knowing they were nearing Halicarnassus, home of the mausoleum. Talk about landmark branding. Bhutan, here comes a classic controversy. Some scholars question whether the quadriga survived the multiple earthquakes that battered the region. Was it destroyed early on, or did it stand for centuries before disappearing? Archaeological evidence is frustratingly sparse, leaving historians to debate in circles. The mystery only adds to the allure. As twilight deepens, you find yourself mesmerized by the shadow the quadriga casts over the harbor, long and dramatic, like a silent horseman guarding the city forever. You take a deep breath, realizing this final crowning glory is more than a sculpture. It's the mausoleum's spirit made manifest. A statement that Mausolus, or at least his memory, rides on. Now that you've marveled at the quadriga's imposing silhouette, it's time to take a closer look at the man behind it all, Artemisia, the queen who turned her grief into one of the most spectacular monuments the ancient world ever saw. Spoiler alert, she's not your average mourning widow. You find yourself wandering the streets of Halicarnassus, overhearing snippets of conversation about her. She's described as fierce, smart, and stubborn as a mule, which is exactly the kind of person you want managing a multi-million-dollar marble project in the 4th century BCE. Artemisia wasn't just overseeing the construction. She was personally involved in the design decisions. She hired some of the era's top architects and artists, insisting on the finest materials and the most elaborate decorations. Some say she even rejected entire plans because they weren't grand enough. That sounds like a queen who knew what she wanted. There's a story about her riding a chariot to the construction site every morning, shouting orders and occasionally delivering biting comments that left even the roughest workers speechless. One craftsman allegedly said, "She commands the stones as if they were her soldiers." But here's where it gets interesting. Artemisia's motivations remain a topic of debate among historians. Was this mausoleum an expression of genuine love? A political statement to cement her family's legacy? Or maybe a bit of both? You bump into a local historian who claims Artemisia's ambition was ahead of her time, and that the mausoleum was as much about power as remembrance. She wanted to be remembered as more than a queen, he says, as a ruler, a visionary, a legend. On the flip side, there's a quieter theory that she was simply a grieving widow who wanted to ensure her husband's name lived on forever. A softer, less dramatic take, but equally possible. One thing you learn for sure. Artemisia's role as a female leader commissioning such a grand monument was highly unusual for that era. It raises all sorts of questions about women's power in the ancient world. How much influence did she really wield? Was she respected or feared? Historians still argue over this point. Later, you find a beautifully preserved inscription praising Artemisia's dedication to the project. It calls her a pillar of strength and credits her with overseeing the mausoleum's completion after Mausolus's death. It's touching, but you can't help but picture her rolling her eyes at the poetic exaggeration. In a side alley, you spot a small statue rumored to be a likeness of Artemisia. The face is stern. The gaze fears exactly how you'd expect someone managing the biggest construction headache in history to look. You leave the city with a newfound respect for the queen who made this dream a reality. Without Artemisia, the mausoleum might have been just another tomb. But with her, it became immortal. Alright, now that you've got a handle on Artemisia's fiery personality, let's zoom in on the artists, the ones who really brought the mausoleum to life. You're stepping into a workshop buzzing with creative chaos. Marble dust swirling in the warm air. The sculptures here are something else. Imagine gods, heroes, and mythical beasts carved with such detail that you almost expect them to step down from their pedestals and start chatting. These artisans aren't just chiseling stone, they're telling stories that will outlast empires. One of the sculptors, wiping sweat from his brow, tells you that the mausoleum was essentially the hottest art commission of its day. Everyone wanted a piece of the action. It's like the Oscars of marble, he jokes. Except the celebrities are gods and kings. You lean in to watch a master craftsman carving a panel that depicts a fierce battle scene. The horses are in mid-gallop, muscles taut, nostrils flared, manes flowing in the imagined wind. It's almost cinematic, a snapshot of frozen drama. Here's a fascinating tidbit. The reliefs don't just celebrate Mausolus's life, they also show scenes of the local Carian culture, blending Persian, Greek, and indigenous influences. This mashup is still a hot topic for historians who debate what it says about cultural identity back then. Was the mausoleum a symbol of unity or just a fancy status symbol? Meanwhile, you spot a half-finished statue of a lion large, majestic, and slightly intimidating. Turns out, lions were a recurring motif, symbolizing strength and protection. But get this, some lions at the site have unusually large teeth and exaggerated features. Scholars aren't sure if that was an artistic choice, or if the sculptors were having a bit of fun poking at local legends. You overhear an argument between two artists about whether the lion should look realistic or mythical. One insists art should reflect nature. The other retorts, no, art is imagination made real. Classic debate. Now, a quirky fact. Some relief panels have tiny holes drilled into the surfaces, probably for attaching metal pieces that have long since disappeared. Imagine the sculptures with bronze or gold embellishments, glinting in the Suna level of detail that would make modern museums jealous. As you wander, you notice that the workshop layout is organized like an ancient assembly line. Different teams specialize in heads, torsos, horses, or decorative borders. The coordination is impressive, given the lack of modern communication tools. However, there's a lingering mystery. Exactly how many sculptures adorn the mausoleum? Archaeological digs have uncovered dozens, but historians argue whether this represents the full collection or just fragments of a grander artistic vision. By evening, the workshop quiets down. You sit on a stone bench, gazing at the intricate work around you. These sculptures aren't just decoration, they're storytellers, guardians, and symbols of a complex world frozen in marble. And the best part? Even centuries later, they still manage to speak across time, whispering the legacy of Mausolus and Artemisia. Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something a little different, the politics and power play swirling around the mausoleum's creation. You think a giant tomb is just about honoring the dead? Think again. In the ancient world, monuments were major flexes, and the mausoleum was basically a billboard screaming, "We're here, and we're a big deal." As you walk through the bustling streets of Halicarnassus, you overhear whispers about alliances, rivalries, and some not-so-subtle attempts at political one-upmanship. Mausolus and Artemisia weren't just building a tomb, they were shaping their dynasty's image for generations. It's like the original political branding campaign, but with a lot more marble. One local merchant grumbles about how all the funds pouring into the mausoleum made taxes skyrocket. You imagine the average citizen thinking, "Great, my money's going into a fancy tomb instead of bread or wine." Classic budget debate, even 400 years ago. Meanwhile, neighboring cities are reportedly jealous. Some dismiss the mausoleum as mere vanity, while others worry it sets a precedent who's next to build a giant monument. You can almost hear the ancient equivalent of side-eye glances and whispered, "tomb envy." Here's a juicy tidbit. Mausolus was actually a satrap, a governor under the Persian Empire. Building such an extravagant tomb was a bold political move, signaling his semi-independent power while still under Persian watch. Historians still debate whether the mausoleum was a subtle act of defiance or a loyal tribute designed to impress the empire. You bump into a group of scholars arguing about this very thing. One insists Mausolus was pushing boundaries, another says he was playing the loyal vassal perfectly. You settle in to eavesdrop. Turns out, this debate's been raging for centuries. And the intrigue doesn't stop there. Artemisia's reign after Mausolus's death wasn't exactly smooth sailing. Power struggles, possible rebellions, and diplomatic maneuvers all played out behind the scenes while the mausoleum rose stone by stone. One particularly interesting rumor you catch is that Artemisia might have used the mausoleum as a political tool, showing off her husband's sand by extension, her own divine right to rule. Whether that was true or just savvy PR, you'll never know for sure. Historians still wrestle with how much politics shaped this monument versus pure personal grief. In the end, you realize the mausoleum wasn't just a tomb, it was a grand statement of power, identity, and legacy, wrapped in layers of marble and myth. You shake your head, smiling. Even in ancient times, people knew how to make an entrance, or in this case, an eternal exit. Alright, now you get to explore what happened after the mausoleum's heyday, how it stood, how it fell, and the epic story of its eventual ruin. Spoiler: Mother Nature wasn't kind. You stroll around the ruins centuries later, imagining the grandeur that once was. The mausoleum survived a few hundred years, looking magnificent, but then came a series of earthquakes. Not just little shakes, but real knockdowns, shake it to the core kinds of quakes that left the whole region trembling. One massive earthquake, probably sometime in the medieval period, dealt the mausoleum a devastating blow. The Great Pyramid and the Quadriga crashed down, and much of the structure crumbled. You can't help but feel a little sorry for all that painstaking work, now just broken marble scattered on the ground. But here's the kicker: people didn't just leave the ruins to rot. Over the centuries, stones from the mausoleum were recycled by locals for building materials. Ancient recycling, if you will. Churches, castles, even houses around Bodrum, the modern city on that spot, got their stones from Mausolus's tomb. You wander through a small medieval fortress nearby, noticing some blocks carved with faint reliefs, probably salvaged from the mausoleum itself. Imagine living in a castle made from the remnants of a wonder of the ancient world. Talk about living history. Oddly enough, the mausoleum's destruction and stone looting created a layer of mystery. By the time archaeologists got interested, much was missing or scattered. Piecing it back together became a centuries-long puzzle, with bits of marble and sculpture spread across museums worldwide. Archaeologists also discovered that the site had layers of other buildings beneath and around the mausoleum, showing that this spot was important for centuries before and after Mausolus. One fun archaeological mystery is whether parts of the mausoleum sculptures were originally painted. Traces of pigment suggest the white marble might have been brightly colored, a surprising thought, since we usually picture ancient statues as plain white. Historians debate if this was common practice or a unique feature. Walking amid the ruins, you can almost hear the whispers of the past, the proud builders, the roaring crowds, and even the earthquakes rumbling beneath. It's a reminder that even the greatest wonders aren't immortal, but their stories live on, reshaped, and retold through time. Alright, now imagine this. Centuries after the mausoleum's collapse, travelers and explorers start hearing whispers about this lost wonder. You're one of those adventurers, armed with curiosity, a dusty map, and maybe a little skepticism. You trek through the rocky hills of what's now Bodrum, piecing together stories from locals and ancient text. The mausoleum, once celebrated, has faded into legend, and many think it's just a myth or exaggerated tale. You can almost feel the thrill of uncovering something long forgotten. Early explorers in the Renaissance and Enlightenment periods became obsessed with the mausoleum. They dug through rubble, hunted for fragments, and tried to reconstruct the glory of this once mighty tomb. Some even smuggled pieces to European museums, sparking debates about ownership and preservation issues still relevant today. You meet a 19th century archaeologist, in your imagination, of course, who's frustrated by the limited technology and hostile terrain. If only we had drones or ground-penetrating radar, he grumbles, we'd find the whole thing in no time. Interestingly, some artifacts from the mausoleum ended up far from Turkey in places like the British Museum and the Louvre. You wonder about how these treasures traveled thousands of miles and what stories they carry now, removed from their original home. A curious fact. Some early travelers confused the mausoleum with nearby castles or temples, leading to all sorts of historical mix-ups. Even now, debates continue over exact locations and which ruins correspond to which parts of the original structure. As you explore this chapter of the mausoleum story, you realize how our understanding of history is always evolving. Each generation uncovers new clues, rewrites narratives, and sometimes even questions what we thought was settled fact. You chuckle at how much effort it takes to keep a 2-0-year-old story alive and How lucky you are to be part of this ongoing adventure, even if it's just in your imagination. Alright, now let's take a step back and think about why the mausoleum still fascinates us today long after its stones have scattered and empires have faded. What makes this tomb so much more than just a burial place? You sit quietly, imagining the stories carved into every block, the hands that shaped each statue, and the passion of Artemisia, who refused to let her husband's memory fade. The mausoleum wasn't just a monument, it was a symbol of love, power, artistry, and ambition, all rolled into one giant marble masterpiece. It also reminds you that even in ancient times, humans loved to leave their mark to say, "I was here," or "We mattered." The mausoleum is a giant shout across the millennia, and you're listening. Here's a fun little tidbit to tuck away. The word mausoleum itself comes from Mausolus's name, proving just how much his tomb changed the way the world talks about monumental graves. You're basically standing at the origin of an entire architectural genre. You reflect on the debates and mysteries that still swirl around the mausoleum, from who sculpted the quadriga, to whether it was painted in bright colors, to how Artemisia's story really unfolded. These unanswered questions keep the story alive, inviting each new generation to imagine and discover. As you lean back, you realize the mausoleum's legacy is more than marble and myth. It's about human creativity and resilience, how stories and memories outlast even the harshest earthquakes and the slowest passage of time. And so, as you prepare to drift off, you carry with you a piece of that ancient wonder, the idea that greatness isn't just built to last, but to inspire. To make us dream a little bigger, love a little harder, and remember a little longer. Now, as the story winds down, imagine yourself gently sinking into a soft, velvety night where time seems to slow. Your breath eases, your thoughts drift like clouds, and the whispers of the mausoleum's ancient stones hum quietly in the background. Feel the cool evening breeze brushing against your skin, carrying the faint scent of Mediterranean pine and salty sea air, wrapping you in a comforting embrace. Each heartbeat slows, matching the rhythm of the waves lapping against distant shores, as if the world itself is sighing with you. The grandeur of marble and stone fades into gentle shadows, and you're no longer standing in a bustling ancient city, but floating in a calm, endless space where stories weave together like lullabies. The echoes of queens and sculptors, travelers and dreamers, all softly sing you to rest. Let your mind wander, free from the weight of the day, as the mausoleum's legacy settles like a warm, quiet light inside you, a beacon guiding you into peaceful dreams. Sleep well, dear traveler. The journey doesn't end here, it just waits patiently for when you return. Good night.